The story opens mid-flight, with a shocking act of disrespect that silences the cabin. The arrogant man believes he owns the space, but the calm dignity of the young boy he humiliates sets the stage for something bigger. A symbolic act of resistance, and a quiet but powerful response shift the energy, just as a flight attendant steps in, hinting at a storm to come. "We don't need your kind sitting this close to us." The words cut through the gentle hum of the airplane cabin like a blade. Heads turned, conversations froze, and the recycled air seemed heavier. The man in the expensive blazer, his tie slightly loosened as though he owned the sky, sneered at the boy seated quietly beside him. The boy, barely 14, slim, with wide brown eyes that revealed both curiosity and restraint, sat with his small hands folded in his lap, silent. The setting was a red-eye flight. Dimmed cabin lights glowed in shades of amber. Passengers were wrapped in blankets, eyes half closed, earbuds snug. The sudden sharpness of the man's voice jolted everyone awake. A mother across the aisle gripped her daughter's hand tighter, sensing what was about to unfold. The man leaned over, his entitlement dripping from every motion. He tapped the flight attendant call button aggressively, then muttered under his breath, "Should have known they'd let anyone on board these days." The boy didn't flinch. He looked out the oval window instead, gazing at the endless stretch of clouds painted silver by moonlight. His silence seemed to mock the man more than words ever could. Then came the moment. The man lifted his paper cup of coffee, steam rising from its lip. He smirked, looked the boy dead in the eye, and tipped it forward. The hot liquid spilled across the boy's white t-shirt, spreading like a stain of cruelty. Gasps erupted. Someone shouted, "Hey!" The boy winced at the burn but didn't cry out. He calmly stood, shook the droplets from his arms and looked down at the spreading brown stain. It wasn't just coffee. It was humiliation, public, loud, designed to break him. But the boy didn't break. He slowly peeled off his damp t-shirt, revealing a plain undershirt beneath. His chest rose steadily, breath even. Then with a quiet dignity he folded the soiled shirt and placed it neatly on his seat. The cabin was silent now. The man expected tears, screams, an outburst, something to feed his superiority. Instead, he was met with calm resistance, a dignity that made his cruelty look small. The boy finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "You'll regret that." It wasn't said with anger, it wasn't shouted. It was a statement, simple and steady, that carried a strange weight. Passengers shifted in their seats, the tension now electric, and then heels clicked against the aisle. From the back of the plane, a flight attendant strode forward. Her navy blue uniform fit sharp, her silver wings glinting under the cabin lights. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence commanded attention. Every eye followed her. She stopped in front of the man, gaze flicking from the stained boy to the coffee cup still trembling in the man's hand. Her lips pressed together, her jaw tight. For a second, silence pressed heavier than gravity. Then she spoke, quiet, precise, dangerous. "Sir, what exactly did you just do?" The man chuckled nervously, trying to brush it off. "Just teaching some manners, kids these days." But her eyes cut him off. They were sharp like steel behind glass. She didn't blink, didn't shift. It was as though the weight of the airline itself stood behind her. The boy sat back down, his folded shirt on his lap. His eyes didn't leave the man's face, but there was no hatred in them, just patience. A patience that promised reckoning. The passengers, once passive, were now witnesses, silent jurors in a trial at 30,000 feet. And though the plane hummed on through the night, everyone knew something had shifted. The man adjusted his tie, suddenly, less comfortable in his wide seat. He muttered something about people being too sensitive, but no one was buying it anymore. The flight attendant leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow audible to all. "Sir, you're about to learn what real manners look like." And with that she turned sharply, gesturing toward the galley. Two more attendants began walking forward, their faces grim, their steps deliberate. The man's smirk faltered. His confidence slipped. For the first time since he opened his mouth, he realized this wasn't his kingdom. The boy, still calm, allowed himself the faintest smile. Not of victory, but of certainty. Something was about to happen, and at 30,000 feet with nowhere to run, the man was trapped in a storm of his own making. "Relax, sweetheart. It's just a little coffee," the man muttered, his smirk returning as though he could erase what everyone had just witnessed. He leaned back in his seat, spreading his legs wide, trying to reclaim space that no longer belonged to him. But the flight attendant didn't flinch. She stood tall, clipboard in hand, her navy blazer perfectly pressed. The golden light above cast a glow on her face, emphasizing the sharp line of her jaw. "Sir," she said evenly, "you've just assaulted a passenger. That's not something we overlook on this aircraft." The man barked a laugh, a hollow sound that rang false. "Assault? Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. It's coffee, he'll live." The passengers weren't buying it. A woman in the row ahead twisted in her seat, glaring. A middle-aged man with reading glasses muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Someone else began recording on their phone, the faint red dot glowing in the dim cabin. The boy sat quietly, hands folded on top of the neatly folded shirt in his lap. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, not the man. He seemed distant, as though the insult hadn't touched him at all. But that very calmness amplified the ugliness of what had just happened. The flight attendant's eyes swept the cabin, registering the witnesses, the phones, the atmosphere. She turned back to the man. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay seated and keep your voice down. We'll be reporting this to the captain." That word, captain, hit differently. Authority, consequences. The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His bravado cracked just slightly. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "I fly all the time, first-class business, you name it. You really think the airline wants to make a fuss over this? A kid spilling coffee?" The boy finally turned. His head. His eyes locked on the man, calm, steady. He said nothing, but his gaze was heavier than any words. It was the gaze of someone who had endured worse, someone who knew storms always passed and left the guilty exposed. The man faltered, losing his words for a second. His face flushed, though whether from anger or embarrassment no one could tell. From the galley, another flight attendant approached, tall and broad-shouldered. His expression was grim, his voice steady. "Everything all right here?" The first attendant nodded subtly, but her eyes never left the man. "We've had an incident. Passenger spilled coffee intentionally." The second attendant looked at the boy, then at the damp stain spreading across the folded shirt. His jaw tightened. He turned back to the man, lowering his voice but making sure nearby passengers could still hear. "You understand that's a federal offense, right?" Gasps rippled. A young woman with earbuds pulled them out, whispering to her friend. People leaned forward in their seats, hungry for justice. The man laughed again, but now it was brittle. "Oh, come on. Don't act like I'm some criminal. I was teaching the brat a lesson, that's all." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Even the engines seemed to fade under it. Every pair of eyes in the cabin fixed on him. His words hung there, exposing him, stripping away his polished veneer. The boy's lips curved into the faintest smile. Small, almost invisible, but full of meaning. The first flight attendant leaned closer, her tone calm but unshakable. "Sir, I strongly suggest you stop talking, right now." The man opened his mouth, then shut it again. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. He reached for his seatbelt, tightening it reflexively, as though anchoring himself against the invisible. Tide turning against him. Across the aisle, a child whispered to her mother, "Why did he do that?" The mother squeezed her daughter's hand and whispered back, "Because some people think they can." The boy heard it. His eyes softened. For the first time since the coffee spilled, his dignity became contagious, spreading silently through the rows. The man shifted again, pulling at his collar. The cabin suddenly felt warmer, tighter. He reached for the call button but hesitated, realizing pressing it now would only make him look weaker. Instead, he muttered, "This is ridiculous," under his breath. But the words carried no power. The second flight attendant crossed his arms, blocking the aisle. The first leaned in once more, her voice quiet but cutting. "You don't own this plane, sir. And you don't decide who belongs on it." The boy looked back out the window, the faint smile lingering. Clouds stretched endless, silver and calm, as though the sky itself was on his side. And in that silence, every passenger knew the seatbelt had tightened around more than his waist. It was tightening around his arrogance, his freedom, his illusion of control. At 30,000 feet, there was no escape. The cabin was no longer a place of rest. What had once been a dim sanctuary of murmured conversations and soft snores had turned into a courtroom in the sky. Every cough, every shuffle, every creak of the seat seemed amplified. The boy sat silently, his folded shirt still resting on his lap, the faint brown stain soaking deeper into the fabric. His eyes remained steady on the clouds beyond the window. He didn't fidget, didn't complain. His silence carried more weight than any outburst could have, but the whispers started. Two businessmen in suits leaned toward each other across the aisle. "Unbelievable," one muttered. "Guy thinks he can get away with that," the other replied. Farther back, a woman whispered to her teenage son, "Don't ever let anyone treat you like that." The boy nodded, eyes wide, watching the scene like it was a lesson etched in fire. Yet, not all voices condemned. From the row behind the arrogant man, another passenger, middle-aged, sharp jaw, arms crossed, murmured just loud enough, "People are too sensitive these days. He didn't mean anything by it." The man's ears perked at the faint support. He straightened slightly, smirk tugging at his lips. He clung to it like a drowning man to driftwood. The flight attendant didn't miss the moment. She stood taller, scanning the cabin with the sharpness of someone who had diffused countless conflicts at 30,000 feet. Her voice cut through the whispers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you this matter is being handled. Please remain seated." But the damage was done. The whispers had already divided the cabin. Some wanted justice, others wanted quiet. And the man fed on the latter, desperate to claw back the image of control. He leaned sideways, addressing the boy at last. "You hear that? Not everyone thinks you're some kind of victim. You should thank me. The world's tougher than you." "Think?" The boy finally turned from the window. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was soft, steady. "I don't need to be tough. The truth is tough enough." The words landed like a blow. Simple, direct, irrefutable. A ripple of agreement moved through the rows. Small nods, quiet murmurs of approval. The man's smirk faltered. The second flight attendant, still looming nearby, stepped closer. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to keep your comments to yourself from now on." The man raised his hands as if in surrender, though his tone dripped with sarcasm. Fine, I'll shut up. Don't want to upset the—" He stopped himself, realizing too late that finishing the sentence would burn whatever shred of credibility he had left. The first flight attendant's eyes narrowed. She was studying him, calculating. Behind her professionalism was something sharper, a steel edge that hinted she wasn't just protecting the boy, she was preparing to dismantle the man's arrogance piece by piece. Meanwhile, the boy leaned, back in his seat, eyes half closed now. His calmness wasn't weakness, it was control. He had shifted from victim to witness, silently recording every gesture, every word, like an invisible ledger no one else could see. Passengers noticed it too. The whispers changed tone. "That kid's strong. He hasn't even raised his voice." "Braver than I would have been," the man squirmed, tugging at his belt again. His power was slipping, not because anyone shouted him down, but because a boy's quiet dignity was dismantling him in front of dozens of strangers. Still, he clung to pride. He leaned forward, resting elbows on knees, lowering his voice just for the flight attendant. "Look, let's not make this bigger than it is. I've got meetings, important people waiting. You don't want to deal with the fallout of treating me like a criminal." Her eyes flicked to his, unshaken. "You've already done that yourself, sir." The words froze him. From somewhere near the back, a phone camera clicked. Someone was capturing every second, and he knew it. His jaw tightened, his eyes darting nervously. The whispers grew louder, like waves building toward a crash. And then, just as the tension peaked, the boy spoke again, voice so quiet that the whole cabin leaned in to hear. "You think no one will remember this when we land, but they will. They'll remember you." The man turned pale. For the first time, the mask of arrogance slipped, revealing something raw, fear. The flight attendant rested a hand gently on the boy's seat, a gesture both protective and symbolic. "Don't." Worry, she said softly, though everyone could hear. He won't be the one remembered here. The boy looked back at the clouds, faint smile touching his lips again, and the man, suddenly small, suddenly cornered, realized the whispers of the cabin weren't whispers anymore. They were judgments, and they were all against him. At $30,000 feet, he was surrounded by witnesses and nowhere left to hide. The intercom chimed, a sharp ding that made everyone sit up straighter. The first flight attendant had disappeared into the galley moments before, and now her voice came through the cabin speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. The captain has been informed of the situation and will be addressing it shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The words were simple, professional, but to the man in the blazer they hit like a verdict. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched. For the first time he looked less like a king and more like a defendant waiting for a gavel to fall. The passengers exchanged glances. The cabin was alive with murmurs again. Phones angled discreetly to capture his every twitch. He shifted uncomfortably, feeling the invisible lens of judgment closing in. "Captain?" he scoffed under his breath, like he cares. But his voice cracked. The boy sat silently, his folded shirt still on his lap. He hadn't said another word since his quiet strike of truth in the last exchange. His gaze remained fixed out the window, watching as the plane sliced through endless black sky. His silence wasn't avoidance, it was dominance. He was choosing when to speak, and that choice made his words heavier than the engines that carried them. The man noticed it, and it ate at him. "Look at him," the man whispered, louder than he intended. "Not even fazed, like he's above me." The second flight attendant leaned closer, voice calm but cutting. "No, sir, not above you. Just not beneath you either." The man's eyes darted to him, face flushed. "You people don't know who I am." From behind him a passenger scoffed. "We don't care who you are. We know what you just did." The man spun halfway around in his seat, glaring. "Mind your business." But it was too late. The line had been crossed. The cabin had shifted from passive witnesses to active voices. Authority wasn't just in the uniformed crew anymore. It was in the collective judgment of dozens of strangers who saw him for what he was. Then the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out, tall, composed, cap perfectly positioned. His presence commanded silence. Even the restless whispers hushed, as though gravity itself had thickened. He walked down the aisle slowly, each step deliberate, every eye following him. The man straightened his tie, forcing a smirk. "Captain, finally. Glad you're here. These attendants are overreacting. Just a minor misunderstanding. No need to blow it up." The captain stopped beside him, his gaze steady. He didn't look at the man first, he looked at the boy. The boy lifted his eyes, calm, unshaken. For a long second the two locked eyes. Something unspoken passed between them. Respect, recognition. Then the captain turned to the man. His voice was low, commanding, measured like a judge's sentence. "I've been briefed on what happened, and I've seen enough faces in this cabin to know the story checks out." The man's smirk faltered. "Faces? You're trusting gossip over me?" The captain leaned closer, his words sharp as steel. "I'm trusting 30 witnesses over one man with coffee stains on his conscience." A ripple of quiet approval passed through the rows. The boy's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for those nearby to notice. The man stammered, desperate. "Captain, I'm a frequent flyer, gold status. I've spent more money on this airline than half this plane combined. You really want to punish loyalty?" The captain's jaw tightened. He straightened, his voice louder now, filling the cabin. "Respect is not bought with miles, sir, and neither is decency." Applause broke out, small at first, then spreading like wildfire. A woman clapped, a man joined. Soon half the cabin was applauding, not for drama, not for spectacle, but for truth. The man shrank in his seat, hands gripping the armrests. He tugged at his seatbelt, fastened too tight now, as though it bound him. His eyes darted, searching for an ally, but every face he met turned cold, resolute. The captain placed a firm hand on the top of the seat. "You will remain seated, silent and compliant until we land. Upon arrival, you'll be escorted for questioning. Do I make myself clear?" The man opened his mouth, but no words came. He nodded stiffly. The captain turned to the boy, lowering his voice, his tone softer now. "Are you all right?" The boy nodded once. "I'm fine." The captain held his gaze for a beat longer, then gave a small nod back, an acknowledgement deeper than words. He turned sharply, walking back toward the cockpit, but the weight of his authority lingered, pressing down on the arrogant man like a second seatbelt. The boy leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. The faintest smile touched his lips, not of triumph, but of knowing. The plane hummed on, but inside something had shifted permanently. The man wasn't flying above anyone anymore. He was crashing under the weight of his own arrogance. The captain's footsteps faded as he disappeared back into the cockpit, leaving behind a silence that was louder than words. The hum of the engines seemed to carry an undercurrent of judgment, a reminder that at 30,000 feet, the truth had nowhere to hide. The man in the blazer sat stiffly, hands clenched on the armrests. His tie was crooked now, his collar damp with sweat. He tugged at his seatbelt again, the strap biting across his lap. No matter how he adjusted it, it felt like a restraint, not a safety measure. The whispers started again, no longer hushed, no longer uncertain. "Did you see the captain's face?" He shut him down completely. "Good. He deserves it." The man's ears burned. Every whisper was a dagger. Every side glance was a gavel. He tried to sit taller, to wear arrogance like armor, but it was cracking. Then, as if fate wanted to remind him of his fragility, the plane jolted. A patch of turbulence rocked the cabin. Cups rattling, overhead bins creaking. Gasps echoed through the rows as passengers clutched armrests and seatbelts. The boy didn't flinch. He sat steady, eyes still fixed on the window, watching the clouds shift and roll like an endless sea. His calm presence was an anchor in the storm, an unspoken reassurance that the turbulence outside was nothing compared to the turbulence within the man beside him. The man, however, grabbed the armrests so hard, his knuckles whitened. His bravado evaporated, replaced with something raw, fear. For a fleeting second, the passengers saw him stripped bare, no longer arrogant, just human. The boy turned his head slowly, studying him. His voice was soft, almost compassionate, but carried a weight sharper than any insult. "You don't look so sure of yourself now." The man's eyes darted to him wide, panicked. "Shut up, just shut up." But the boy didn't need to say more. His calmness was louder than the man's fear. The turbulence passed quickly, the plane leveling again, the captain's voice soothing over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, just a small patch of rough air. We're clear now. Please remain seated with your belts fastened." The passengers exhaled, some laughing nervously, but the moment had shifted something deeper. They had seen the arrogant man vulnerable, and the sight weakened him more than any rebuke. From across the aisle, a passenger leaned toward another. "He was scared stiff. Did you see?" The other nodded. "Guess he's not so tough after all." The man heard it, his jaw clenched. He forced a laugh, loud and brittle. "Scared? Please, I wasn't scared, just cautious." No one believed him. The first flight attendant returned, standing tall in the aisle. Her eyes swept the cabin before landing on the man. "Are you comfortable, sir?" she asked, her tone so polite it dripped with irony. He swallowed. "Fine. Good, because for the remainder of this flight, you'll stay exactly where you... Gert, do you understand?" He wanted to argue, wanted to reclaim his throne, but the weight of the cabin's eyes pressed down on him. He nodded stiffly. The boy leaned forward slightly, his voice low but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "You thought spilling coffee would make you bigger, but it just showed how small you are." The words cut deeper than any reprimand. They weren't angry. They weren't cruel. They were true. And truth, spoken quietly, burned louder than rage. A hush fell around them. Passengers shifted, some nodding subtly, others exchanging approving looks. The boy had said what everyone felt but hadn't dared to voice. The man turned red, fists clenching, but he didn't reply. For the first time he was silent, not out of choice but out of defeat. The turbulence outside had ended, but inside him it still raged. He leaned back, closing his eyes, trying to rebuild the walls of arrogance. But every whisper, every sideways glance, every ripple of approval for the boy's words chipped away at them. And the boy? He simply returned to watching the clouds, his presence as steady as the horizon beyond the window. The man realized then that this wasn't just about spilled coffee. It wasn't even about the flight. It was about something bigger, something he couldn't control, dignity versus arrogance. And dignity was winning. The faint red light blinked again. A phone, angled from 2 rows back, caught the man's every twitch. He noticed it this time. His stomach dropped. "Hey, turn that off," he barked, pointing a trembling finger. The woman holding the phone didn't flinch. "Public flight, public behavior. You don't get to hide what you did." Laughter rippled through the cabin, short and sharp, not cruel, but liberating. The sound of people who had been holding their breath too long. The man's face flushed, crimson. He turned to the flight attendants. "You gonna allow this? Passengers recording me like I'm some criminal?" The first flight attendant's eyes were cold steel. "Sir, we're not stopping anyone from documenting the truth." His mouth opened, but no words came. The truth. That word landed harder than any insult. It wasn't about perception anymore. It was about evidence. The stain on the boy's shirt, the whispers of passengers, the trembling coffee cup, all caught forever in glowing pixels. The boy hadn't moved. His hands rested lightly on the folded shirt. His gaze lingered on the phone, then returned to the clouds. For him, the recording wasn't a weapon. It was simply proof that dignity survives even when coffee stains. The man tried again, this time leaning toward the woman with the phone. His voice was low, venomous. "Delete it or you'll regret it." The passenger next to her, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, shifted, blocking her with his arm. "Threaten her again and you'll regret it." The man sat back quickly, swallowed. His arrogance was slipping into desperation. Every attempt to command respect only revealed how little he had left. Another phone lifted, then another. The faint glow of screens lit the rows like lanterns in the dark. The cabin had become a jury, each juror holding their own record of truth. The boy glanced at them, then at the man. For the first time, he spoke with something close to warmth in his voice. "See, they're not afraid of you, not anymore." The man's lips parted, but nothing came out. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. For the first time in his life, maybe, his words had no power. The plane shuddered gently as it cut through another layer of clouds, but inside, the turbulence wasn't from the sky. It was from the shifting tide of power. The first flight attendant crouched slightly beside the boy. Her voice softened, though her words carried through the silence. "Are you all right? Do you need a change of clothes, a blanket?" The boy shook his head. "I'm fine." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer. She could see it, the strength. That kept him sitting tall when most would have crumbled. She gave a small nod and stood, her posture radiating quiet pride. The man sneered, desperate for an opening. "Oh, so now he's a hero? Kid spills coffee and suddenly he's saint of the skies," but no one laughed with him, no one agreed. His words echoed into emptiness. From behind, a passenger muttered, "He still doesn't get it." Another replied, "He never will." The boy didn't respond. His silence was the sharpest rebuke. Minutes passed. The hum of the engines returned. As background, but no one slept. No one relaxed. The cabin was awake, alive, locked in silent judgment. The man tugged at his blazer, trying to compose himself. He whispered to no one in particular, "This'll blow over. When we land, no one will care." But the boy heard him. Slowly he turned, meeting his eyes with a calm so unnerving it silenced the entire row. "You're wrong," the boy said, softly. "Because when we land, you'll still be you." It was the quietest sentence, but it carried the heaviest weight. The man swallowed hard. He looked away, suddenly fascinated by the seatback screen in front of him, though it was black. He couldn't face the boy anymore, couldn't face the judgment in his stillness. The phones kept recording, the passengers kept watching, the attendants kept standing guard, and through it all, the boy kept his composure, unmoved. The man thought the flight was almost over, but in reality his downfall had just begun. The seatbelt sign dinged overhead, a soft chime that usually went unnoticed. This time it landed like a gavel. The descent had begun. Soon the cabin's drama would spill. into the terminal below where consequences waited. The arrogant man sat stiff, lips pressed into a hard line. His eyes darted between the glowing phones, the attendants who refused to meet his gaze, and the boy beside him, serene, unshaken, still marked by a dark stain of coffee that would not fade. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice rolled. Through the intercom, calm yet firm, "We've been informed authorities will be meeting us upon arrival. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is off." The words sliced through the air. Authorities. Meeting us. The man's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, whispering hoarsely toward the attendants. "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly think I'm the criminal here." The lead attendant approached, her expression as unreadable as polished glass. "Sir, your behavior has been documented. It will be addressed properly once we land." He scoffed, but the sound was hollow. "Documented? You mean a bunch of shaky phone videos? No one will care. People forget. Always do." The attendant didn't blink. Not this time. The boy shifted slightly, turning to the window as the city's lights bloomed beneath the wings. His reflection shimmered in the glass. A young face, stained shirt, but eyes that carried a depth far older. A voice rose from the back of the cabin, hesitant but clear. "We'll testify if needed. Every one of us." Murmurs of agreement followed, growing stronger, flowing like a current through the rows. Heads nodded, phones tilted higher. The man whipped around. "Testify? Against me? I'm a respected—" His words caught in his throat. For the first time he realized no one respected him here. He tried to straighten his tie, but his fingers fumbled. Sweat gathered on his temples. He muttered under his breath, half to himself, half to the boy. This is overblown, you'll see. I'll walk out of here and none of this will matter." The boy didn't look at him. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any rebuttal. The cabin tilted gently, the city growing larger below. The hum of dissent filled every pause, every glance. The man gripped his armrest, knuckles white. He leaned in closer to the boy now, voice low, desperate. "Say something in my favor. Tell them I didn't mean it. You don't understand what this could do to me." The boy turned, slowly, deliberately. His voice was calm, almost pitying. "What it does to you is your problem. What you did to me, that's on record now." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the silence. The man's mouth opened, then closed again. He had no defense. The descent steepened. The city lights glimmered closer now like a runway lined with judgment. One of the attendants leaned toward the boy. "You're very strong," she said softly, almost to herself. "You've carried yourself with more dignity than most adults I've seen." The boy offered a small nod, his lips pressed together. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't triumphant, he was simply steady. The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trapped in a prison of his own making. Every second brought the ground nearer. Every second brought reality closer. For years his arrogance had insulated him. In boardrooms, in restaurants, in airports, he had always been the loudest voice, the one who could sneer and watch others fold. But here, 30,000 feet above the earth, surrounded by strangers who refused to bow, he had discovered the limits of his power, and those limits were closing in. The captain's voice returned. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The attendants moved with calm efficiency, checking belts, tightening trays. But their eyes kept flicking back, always to the boy, never to the man. The engines roared lower, the wheels unfolded, and the cabin rattled as the plane cut through the final layer of cloud. The runway lights stretched ahead, twin lines guiding them home. The man pressed himself into his seat, muttering, "Just a misunderstanding, just a misunderstanding." As if repeating it enough would make it true. The boy whispered to himself, barely audible, a mantra of a different kind. "It's almost over." The wheels touched down with a heavy thud. The cabin jolted. A cheer rose from somewhere in the back, but it wasn't for the landing. It was for survival, the survival of truth, dignity, and courage. As the engines reversed and the plane slowed, the man's breathing quickened. The boys slowed, because one of them was running out of time, and the other was finally about to step into his own. The cabin hissed as the plane slowed, brakes squealing against the runway. A collective exhale spread through the passengers, but no one moved. Seatbelts clicked tighter, not looser, as if every soul on board sensed that the real turbulence hadn't ended. It was just beginning. The captain's voice floated through, the speakers steady, practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Local authorities will be boarding momentarily. We appreciate your cooperation." A murmur rippled through the rows. Heads craned toward the front, toward the sealed door. The arrogant man's breath quickened. His gaze flicked from aisle to window like a cornered animal. "This is absurd," he hissed, tugging at his tie. "They're here for some petty scene over coffee?" The boy sat silently beside him, his shirt still stained, his face unreadable. He didn't need to speak. The silence of the entire cabin spoke for him. The door opened with a metallic clunk. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence slicing through the stale air. They moved with purpose, scanning the rows, their boots striking the floor with quiet authority. Behind them came a representative from airport security, clipboard in hand, her eyes sharp and unyielding. She gave a nod to the lead flight attendant, who quickly stepped forward. "This is the individual," the attendant said firmly, pointing to the man without hesitation. "Passenger in seat 14C. His actions endangered another passenger and disrupted this flight." All eyes turned to him. The arrogant man's cheeks flushed red, then pale. He forced a laugh, brittle as glass. "Endangered?" I spilled some coffee. "Overreacting, aren't we?" The officer nearest him didn't blink. "Sir, we'll need you to stand up." "I'm not going anywhere," he snapped. "This is ridiculous. I'm a paying customer. You should be thanking me for flying this overpriced—" "Sir!" The officer interrupted, voice calm but edged with steel. "Stand up now." For the first time, the man noticed the phone still pointed his way. The glowing screens were witnesses, relentless and impartial. He swallowed hard, sweat dotting his brow. Passengers spoke up, voices overlapping. He did it deliberately. He was threatening that boy. We all saw it. The officer raised a hand for silence, then turned to the boy. "Son, you all right?" The boy nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I'm fine now." The man scoffed, trying to reclaim ground. "Fine now. See? No harm done. Just a misunderstanding between strangers." But the boy's calm words cut through his defense like a knife. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. He wanted me to feel small." The cabin stilled. The weight of the truth hung heavier than the air pressure itself. The officer's jaw tightened. "Sir, please come with us." The man's bravado cracked. His hands shook as he fumbled for his jacket. "You don't understand who I am. I have influence, friends in places you couldn't imagine. If you take me off this plane, you'll regret it." The lead attendant crossed her arms. "The only one who'll regret anything here is you." Applause broke out, sudden and sharp, rolling like thunder from the back rows forward. The man flinched. He had the sound, realizing it wasn't for him, it was against him. The officers flanked him now, firm hands guiding him up. His legs resisted, but his strength faltered. His shoes scuffed against the carpet as he was pulled into the aisle. As he passed the boy, he tried one last time, whispering venom through clenched teeth. "You'll regret this." The boy looked up, his voice soft yet steady. "No, you will." Gasps, nods, and murmurs echoed around them. The balance of power had shifted entirely. The officers escorted the man toward the exit. His tie hung loose, his confidence shredded. Passengers leaned into the aisle, phones capturing every second. At the front, the airport security officer checked her clipboard, then gave a sharp nod. "We'll take it from here." The door opened, cool night air, rushing into the cabin. The man was led down the jet bridge, his protests echoing back but carrying no weight. When the door sealed again, the silence that followed was electric. The lead attendant turned, addressing the cabin. "Thank you for your patience. We'll begin deplaning shortly. And to our young passenger," she looked directly at the boy, her voice softening, "thank you for your strength." A smattering of applause rose again, this time pure, unbroken, swelling into something almost triumphant. The boy lowered his head modestly, but his eyes glimmered with quiet pride. The arrogant man was gone, but his shadow lingered, a reminder of what had been endured and what had finally been overcome. The cabin door sealed with a heavy thud, muting the last echoes of the man's protests as he was escorted away. For the first time since the turbulence of conflict began, the air inside the plane felt breathable again, shoulders relaxed, muscles unclenched. Conversations rose like the soft hum of an orchestra, tuning back up after silence. Yet beneath the sighs of relief, something else lingered, a profound awareness that what had just unfolded was larger than spilled coffee or a single confrontation. It was a mirror, one that had reflected something raw about the world outside these cabin walls. The boy sat quietly in his seat, tracing the faint outline of the coffee stain on his shirt. His hands rested in his lap, steady now, but his mind replayed each moment. The shock, the stares, the man's venomous words. And then the wave of support, the strangers who had stepped forward, the flight attendant's strength. "Are you sure you're all right?" The attendant crouched beside him, her tone gentle now, maternal almost. He looked up, eyes brighter than before. "Yes, I'm fine." A pause. "Thank you for standing up for me." Her lips curved into a small smile. "No, son, thank you. You reminded everyone here of something important, that silence can be dangerous, but courage—" She glanced around at the passengers. "Courage changes everything." The boy nodded, though he still felt the heaviness of being the one singled out. His voice was barely a whisper. "It's just, I didn't do anything and still—" "You existed," the attendant said, her eyes softening. "And that was enough to threaten him. That's why your calmness was more powerful than anything he could throw at you." Across the aisle, an older woman leaned forward, resting a hand on her armrest. "She's right, dear, I've flown for years, but tonight, I'll never forget the look on your face when you said you wanted me to feel small. That was truth, and it hit harder than his coffee ever could." The boy flushed, unused to such attention. One by one, voices joined in. A businessman 2 rows ahead turned back. "I'll be telling my kids about this, about how people came together, about how silence wasn't an option." A mother, clutching her toddler, spoke up. "You reminded me of something I need to teach. My daughter. That kindness matters most when it's hardest to give." The words gathered around him like a quilt being stitched, each voice a patch of warmth, covering the sting of what he had endured. Even the captain emerged from the cockpit, once the cabin was settled. His hat tucked under one arm, he walked down the aisle and stopped by the boy's seat. "On behalf of the crew, I want to thank you. You handled yourself with grace most adults couldn't manage under such pressure." The boy blinked, surprised. "I didn't feel graceful." The captain chuckled softly. "Grace isn't about what you feel, it's about what others see in you. And believe me, everyone here saw it." For a moment silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy, it was reverent. Then a man in the back, a quiet figure who had filmed much of the ordeal, stood and lifted his phone. "This video is already uploading," he admitted, his voice steady. "The world's going to see what happened, not just the ugliness, but the strength too." The boy's heart skipped. The world? He hadn't thought beyond this cabin. The idea of strangers everywhere watching his pain made his stomach tighten. But then he thought of the officer's words, the flight attendant's defiance, the applause. That had thundered like justice itself. Maybe, just maybe, the world needed to see. The flight attendant touched his shoulder gently. "Don't worry. You're not alone in this. We all stood with you, and we still will." The engines began to hum again as the plane taxied toward the gate. Seatbelts clicked open as the announcement for deplaning rang out. Yet no one rushed to leave. Instead, they moved carefully, almost ceremonially, each glance toward the boy carrying an unspoken acknowledgement. Respect, solidarity, even admiration. As the aisle cleared, the boy remained seated, waiting. The attendant lingered beside him. "Take your time, there's no hurry." He finally rose, the stain on his shirt still visible but transformed now. It was no longer a mark of humiliation, it was a badge of endurance. As he stepped into the aisle, scattered applause began again, soft but growing, until the entire cabin clapped as he walked forward. He lowered his head, embarrassed, yet uplifted. Each clap echoing like a heartbeat telling him, "You are not small." When the cabin door opened and the tunnel of the jet bridge stretched ahead, the boy paused, inhaling deeply. The night air beyond was cool, sharp, cleansing. He knew he was walking not just off a plane, but out of one chapter of his life into something far bigger, The cabin lights brightened as the plane rolled to a stop at the gate. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off, but no one leapt for the overhead bins. Instead, the passengers sat in a kind of hushed awe, their eyes drawn to the boy who had become the quiet center of everything. The flight attendant guided him into the aisle, one hand steady on his shoulder. "Ready?" she asked softly. He hesitated, glancing back at the rows of faces. People he had never met, people who had witnessed his humiliation and his courage. Their nods and faint smiles gave him a strength he hadn't known he carried. He nodded. Yes. As he stepped into the jet bridge, the atmosphere shifted. Instead of anonymity, a wall of flashing lights and murmuring voices awaited. Word had spread fast. The man's removal, the confrontation, the boy's quiet words, video snippets already rippled across social media like wildfire. Reporters and curious travelers pressed forward. "Is it true you stood up to him? Can you tell us what you felt in that moment? Do you think justice was served?" The boy froze, overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight. He clutched his backpack tightly, unsure if his voice belonged in this sea of microphones and cameras. Then the flight attendant leaned down. "You don't owe anyone answers, but if you want to speak, the world is listening." His heart thumped hard. He remembered the sting of hot coffee, the laughter that man expected to hear, the silence he almost accepted. And he remembered the moment he chose to speak instead. He drew in a breath. His voice was steady, though quiet at first. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to be noticed. But I learned something today. Sometimes silence makes you smaller. And when people try to make you feel that way, you have a choice." The murmurs hushed, cameras steadied, even strangers leaned closer. "I chose not to be small," he continued, his eyes lifting now. "I chose to speak, and when I did, I found out I wasn't alone." Applause broke out in the terminal. Unexpected, raw, genuine. Travelers who hadn't even been on the flight clapped, their hands echoing through the high ceilings. The boy blinked in disbelief. Behind him, the passengers from the plane had gathered, standing shoulder to shoulder. The businessman, the mother with her child, the officer who had restrained the aggressor, all there, a living wall of solidarity. A uniformed airline official approached, flanked by security. "Young man, on behalf of the airline, we want to apologize for what you endured. That man will face the consequences of his actions, but more importantly, we want to thank you. Because of you, our staff and passengers remembered what standing together really means." The boy shifted, uneasy under so much attention. I just wanted it to stop." The official smiled gently. "Sometimes the simplest wish sparks the biggest change." The crowd parted as an older man in a tailored suit walked forward, an executive clearly. He extended his hand. "I'm the regional director. We'll be making sure our crews get more training because of you. No child, no passenger should ever go through what you did." The boy shook his hand hesitantly, the gesture both surreal and grounding. Reporters tried again, their voices rising with urgency. "What message do you want to give to others who might face prejudice like you did?" The boy paused. For a moment, the weight of every eye pressed against him. He could have shrugged, stayed silent, retreated back into anonymity, but instead he lifted his chin. His voice carried this time. "Don't let anyone decide your worth for you. You're not small. You never were." The words hung in the air, like a banner, bold and undeniable. The flight attendant's eyes shimmered with pride. She whispered almost to herself, "That's the truth the whole world needed to hear." As the crowd surged again, the boy turned toward the exit. Beyond the glass doors, the city lights twinkled, a horizon of possibility. He felt taller somehow, not because the world had changed completely, but because he had. Every step out of that terminal was a step away from being defined by someone else's cruelty, and a step toward defining himself. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew this moment wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were less. Everyone who had stayed silent when they wished they hadn't. Everyone waiting for courage to find them. Tonight, courage had found him, and through him it might find others too. The night air met his face as he left the airport, cool and liberating. The echo of applause still rang faintly in his ears, not as noise but as a promise. He walked into the darkness, not small, not broken, but unshaken.